everyone. Thank you all for coming. This is the third in a series of talks about misconceptions that we've been running here in association with the Bournemouth chaplaincy. So the aim of these talks is really to try and break down some of the barriers and some of the misconceptions that we may have about different worldviews to our own or different faiths and beliefs. So we've had so far misconceptions of Muslims, misconceptions of Christians, and today is misconceptions about humanists and atheists. And our speakers, we've got a special treat today, not just one speaker but three. So we have Chris Street, we have Lynn Glass, and John Davison. So yeah, can you welcome them please?
Right, well, many thanks. I'm Chris Street, and I'm a member of Dorset Humanists. I'm also a member of Atheism UK. Now, I guess everybody knows what atheism is, so I won't sort of bore you with that. But I will be talking a bit about humanism. So, yes, there we go. That's me, Chris Street, and John and Lynn. And many thanks for the Bournemouth Humanists and Atheists Society for inviting us along to talk Tuesday. So, a quick summary of what I'll be talking about. About 20 minutes probably giving this presentation, hopefully. And then it's open to questions regarding my presentation. And then Lynn might like to say something, and so we'll go on.
Excuse me,
yeah.
possible speaker?
Sure,
yeah.
That's okay, we'll do. So I'll be, if you'd like to move to the front, maybe, I don't know. But,
I can't hear, so we can't hear.
Okay. No. I should talk loud.
Thank you.
So we'll be talking about what is humanism. And there's a recent book by Keenan Malikow, which is actually not out yet, it's coming out. It's called The Quest for the Moral Compass. And I'll be addressing the main misconception, which I believe is if God does not exist, everything is permitted. And then back in 1946, there was a book written called Man's Search for Meaning, a guy who spent 3 years in various concentration camps. I'll also be talking a bit about the Golden Rule, and there's a book by a former bishop of Edinburgh, Richard Holloway, called Godless Morality. So I'll speak a bit about that. And then we've got a video by Stephen Fry. Now I haven't actually got around to testing to see whether the video works, so it probably won't. But anyway, and that was one that came out a week ago. And then we'll have questions. So what is humanism? Well, somebody who believes in humanism is called a humanist. And a humanist basically trusts to the scientific method to understand how the universe works. And we also reject the idea of any supernatural beings of any sort, mainly because we see no reliable evidence for them. And so humanists are all atheist or agnostic. And our ethical decisions we try to base them on reason and on empathy and on a concern for human beings and obviously sentient animals. So we believe that in the absence of an afterlife and any discernible purpose for the universe, human beings can act to give their own lives meaning. And so by seeking happiness in this life, because we don't believe there's any other life to look forward to, we do that by helping others to do the same, to enjoy the current life. And this was Virginia Woolf put it rather more simply than what I've just said. She said, well, my notion is to think of the human beings first and let the abstract ideas take care of themselves, which is quite a nice way of perhaps thinking about it. Ricky Gervais says it slightly differently. So you won't burn in hell, but be nice anyway. That's Ricky Gervais, which is a Ricky Gervais type of quote. And so we believe we can be good without God. In fact, I'm wearing a badge. So to me. So I'll be talking about The Quest for a Moral Compass by Keenan Mallett. This is actually out in about 6 weeks' time. 400 pages of the history of... you've got one. Yeah, this book it's called The Moral Compass, and it's global history of ethics. So, for example, it talks about ethics in China, for example. It's not just European-centred. So, what I'm really suggesting is that, can you see? What I'm suggesting is the main misconception that the religious have of atheists and humanists is that if God does not exist, then everything is permitted. And this was what Dostoevsky said, was purported to have said. And it's probably the main kind of reflex response of believers to a godless world. So I'm saying that if God does not exist, everything is permitted. And without religious faith, so the saying goes, you cannot anchor, you don't have the anchors for moral truth. And without religious faith, you can't really, truly know right from wrong. And without religious faith, everybody would pick and choose their moral values. These are the main criticisms that are brought forward. And so, religious people pick and choose their beliefs too. Leviticus sanctified slavery. Adulterers should be both put to death. You should chase your enemies and they will fall by your sword, according to Exodus. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Whilst other Christians think homosexuality is no sin at all, and that others think that gays can become priests. Some Christians think the ordination of women bishops is acceptable. Others that abortion is wrong. Now, few modern-day Christians would accept these commands. Other commands they would accept. Even today, some Christians read passages in Paul or Leviticus, and they think that the Bible justifies executing gays. Each side reads the Bible in the way they wish, according to their worldview that they bring to the Bible. And belief in God does not mean that each of us don't have to make up our own minds about what is right or wrong. Even those who follow the Bible literally have to choose a set of values. There are hundreds of values in the Bible. Some of them are conflicting. Christians pick and choose those they believe in. Hundreds of years ago, people burned thousands, tens of thousands of witches because the Bible told them to. Now we don't burn witches. Not because God has changed his mind, but collectively, society has changed its mind. And believers pick and choose which moral values they believe in. Supposedly, these moral values are expanded by God and are like ethical anchors, as Christian Mallett says in his book. They're set in concrete. Without that concrete, some religious say, we'll be lost in a moral miasma. Some ardent atheists or humanists also yearn for an ethical anchor in concrete too. For them, the anchor of our moral values is not in some supernatural God, but in nature or in science, as Sam Harris suggests in his The Moral Landscape book, which came out in 2010. But Keenan Mallett says the search for ethical anchors in concrete is the problem. Not because values are arbitrary or relative, but because what makes values non-arbitrary is not because they are fixed in some transcendental realm or that they are defined objectively by science, but because they emerge through humanity's collective judgment. It is loss of belief in our capacity to make such collective judgments that underlies today's moral anxieties. This was what Freddie Eyre said. You can read that. No moral system can rest solely on authority. It can never be sufficient justification for performing any action if someone commands it. And the Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl said, everything can be taken from a man but one thing. The last of the human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Now, Viktor Frankl wrote this book, A Man's Search for Meaning, in 1946. And basically what he was saying was that humans should not ask what the meaning of life is. Meaning is not something to be discovered. Meaning is something that humans create by acting on the world. Humans are self-determined. You decide what your existence will be. So, there is no moral safety net, which of course can be a little bit disconcerting. The human condition is that of possessing no moral safety net. No God, no scientific law to guide what morals to follow. No amount of ethical concrete can protect us from falling off the moral tightrope. That is why, said Keenan Mallet, we have things like Auschwitz and ethnic cleansing. That can be a highly disconcerting prospect. In other words, no moral safety. When we look back on history of the 20th century, but it's also highly exhilarating because what it says is that it's up to us to decide what to do with our lives, to define the values by which we live, to define the kind of creatures that we are and the kind of creatures we want to be. It can be a disconcerting prospect, but it can also be an exhilarating one. Being human, we have a choice to decide which one it is. Patrick Stewart is a member of the British Human Association, and he says, it's what you do from now on that will either move our civilization forward a few tiny steps, or else begin to march steadily backward. So how should we live? Well, do we follow Jesus? Or be like Buddha? Well, Nietzsche said, do not follow me, but follow yourself. This was something I found today on Facebook, on Dorset Humanists site. You don't need religion to have morals. If you can't determine right from wrong, then you lack empathy, not religion. Does that picture remind you?
I guess
Yeah. Well, of course, there's man on the left, and there ain't nothing else on the right. And thanks for John for that this morning. So, ethics and morality. What I'm saying is that ethics or morality is intrinsic to society. It's a bit like grammar is intrinsic to language. Some moral rules endure, for example, prohibitions against murder and rape, but other moral rules change over time, for example, slavery and homosexuality. Morality is culture but bound. It can be relatively stable at any one time and in any one place, but morality constantly shifts and changes, a bit like language and culture itself. So, well, where does morality come from, if not from God? no solid moral foundations, we believe, but morality is stable enough for us to live together. Morality is certainly flexible enough for debates about contentious moral issues. And why should I be ethical if I don't believe in a God? Well, it's all to do with promoting virtue, as Aristotle might have said, and also character, philanthropy, kindness and caring. That's why I'm ethical. And also it's good for society, and it's good probably for our own well-being. And of course, Aristotle talked about the good life. And he said, well, you need courage, you need to take a stand against injustice, you need to be kind, you need to have patience, you need humility, in other words, to listen to others, question your own beliefs. And of course, what you believe today might be shown to be wrong tomorrow. So the good life is the life well lived. It's a set of values and virtues. For example, integrity. You want to be true to yourself and others. You want to be open. And you want to play by the rules, by and large. Lynn doesn't always play by the rules. Never mind. And of course, yes, generosity. Work. You want to treat work seriously. And have a sense of citizenship. So responsibility and integrity, fairness and participation in society. And a few atheists and humanists have come up with 10 commandments, which none of them really follow. But anyway, I've got 3 sets of 10 commandments. There's no one set of 10 commandments, I have to stress. And so Richard Dawkins, who's heard of Richard? He's the vice president of the British Humanists Association, amongst other things. And I've just summarised his commandments there, but I will go through them because they are I think, quite good. So the first one is, do not do to others what you would not want them to do to you, which of course is the golden rule, or the reverse of the golden rule. He says, in all things strive to cause no harm. And he says, treat your fellow human beings, your fellow living things, and the world in general with love, honesty, faithfulness and respect. His fourth one is, do not overlook evil or shrink from administering justice, but always be ready to forgive wrongdoing, freely admitted and honestly regretted. His fifth is, live life with a sense of joy and wonder. I bet you guys never thought Richard Dawkins could. Anyway, number 6 from Richard Dawkins is, and this is in his God Delusion, page 106, which he published in 2006. Always seek to be learning something new. Test all things. Always check your ideas against the facts, and be ready to discard even a cherished belief if it does not conform. And then finally, his number 8 is, never seek to censor or cut yourself off from dissent. Always respect the right of others to disagree with you. And number 9 is, form independent opinions on the basis of your reason and experience, and do not allow yourself to be led blindly by others. And finally, number 10 is question everything. And we've got another series of 10 commandments, and these are actually a bit more succinct. That's there. So have a look at that. Can you see that? Can you see the book? Okay? Yeah. So I'll just go through: love well, seek the good in all things, harm no others, think for yourself, take responsibility, respect nature, do your utmost, be informed, be kind, be courageous. And this is a guy called Alain de Botton. His 10 commandments are, again, quite simply, although he goes into a lot of detail, which I won't go into now, but his 10 commandments are resilience, empathy, patience, sacrifice, politeness, self-awareness, forgiveness, hope and confidence. And this is the 7 wonders of the world, which John provided me this morning. The 7 wonders are to see, to hear, to touch, to taste, to feel, to laugh, and to love. Which I thought was quite nice. A guy called Sam Harris wrote a book called The Moral Landscape, and he purports to show that science shows which morals are right or wrong. If you're interested in that book, I think it's quite a good book. Again, I won't go into detail here, but he basically says, and this is in his own summary, morality and values depend on conscious minds. Minds experience well-being and suffering. Conscious minds are natural phenomena, and we can get an ought from an is. And obviously that is quite contentious, even within the humanist and atheist circles. Richard Holloway, I mentioned, he wrote a book called Godless Morality. And he sees morality as human. He was the Bishop of Edinburgh. And I do have that book here. So if anybody wants to have a look at this one, it's 160 pages, essentially. It's really quite good. So he sees all morality as human endeavour. And like civil law, morals evolve. And they rest on consent of society. And they're continually renegotiated. Moral dilemmas, he says, are not about right or wrong, but about a middle way. And that is helped by the dynamic nature of humanity. And he says, use non-religious ethics. He also says that we should replace, instead of perfectly good, we should replace it by better. The Euthyphro dilemma is another. It's Plato's dialogue. And Socrates asks Euthyphro, is the god loved by the gods because it is good, or is it good because it is loved by the gods? It's a bit of a tongue twister, a bit of a mind twister, that one. Shall I read that again? Yeah. So yeah, this was Plato's dialogue, the Euthyphro dilemma. And Socrates was asking Euthyphro, in the Socratic method, is the good loved by the gods because it is good, or is it good because it's loved by the gods? So if the good is loved by the gods because it is good, why do we need gods? And if it is good because it is loved by the gods, then gods would declare anything good. For example, like stoning or rape. So these are the two this is the dilemma that Plato came up. And jumping about now, we come to the British Humanist Association Golden Rule. This is their 1999 version. Treat other people as you'd want to be treated in their situation, and don't do things you wouldn't want to be done to you. So there's a kind of like a reverse. I've actually, somewhere, I've got a poster. And of course, the Golden Rule is not unique to humanism by any means. There's this poster here, which is so well put up. You can't quite get around to it with the PowerPoint. Have a look at that. This is the Golden Rule. Right down here is the humanist Golden Rule, but these are all the other Golden Rules by all the different religions. It's quite good. Yes, this is Stephen Fry. He's a distinguished supporter of the British Humanist Association, and he says it's enough to be benign, to be gentle, to be funny, to be kind.
You've got non-conformist blue check there.
Yeah, I think it's not going to work.
There's some spirit acting against me.
It's a judgment. Yeah. Right. I don't know if it's going to work. I doubt it will. Oh, no, it's not. Have you got any volume on this? No. Okay, let's watch it.
You've got no chance.
No,
I'm not sure that's really going to work.
I'm not sure if it is. Let's stick that.
Maybe
Right.
I can just write down the link. Was that the link to the video? So
Yeah, that's right.
read it in my own.
That's it. Yeah, have a look at it. It's humanism.org.uk, and it's just / that's humanism. And there are actually 4 videos on that slide.
They're only a couple of minutes each.
Yeah, they're about 3 minutes.
Okay, I've written the link now, found.
Yeah, okay. Right, so where are we going? Yeah, we've seen that. Right, so have you got any questions specifically about what I've been talking about? We can talk about other misconceptions perhaps afterwards. Are there any questions?
It just struck me
Yeah.
that a lot of the, quotes, Ten Commandments, seem to be written from a negative point of view rather than a positive point. Instead of trying to do no harm, wouldn't it be better to be sort of trying to do good? I think which is sort of seems to be more of a compelling, thing to do in
I
the
think you're
world.
right. I think there's the positive side, and there's always the flip side of the coin, the negative side. So, for example, golden rule. So the positive side is saying, treat other people as you would like to be treated. But the negative side, the flip side of the coin, is to say, don't treat other people in ways you wouldn't want to be treated.
I just wondered why that was. Why focus on the negative rather than...
Was there a particular negative one that you were concerned about?
Well, do no harm.
Mm.
I mean, I think that's actually a negative way of looking at trying to do good.
Yes. But others will say, well, do good.
So they are two separate things.
Yeah.
You can have a middle way where you don't do good and you don't do bad. So, I mean, you've got to consider all 3.
Would they have been written that way because that's the way the Ten Commandments?
That's what you were saying.
Yeah.
That would just be one.
Yes.
Human behaviour is thought to be governed by that which is most beneficial to our survival as a species, right?
Right, yeah.
So you kind of spoke about the negative things that religious people bring to the earth.
Yeah.
But don't you think that religion could also be beneficial to our survival as a species?
Yeah, I think there are some evolutionary theories that say that way back, millennia ago, because there was a benefit of people climbing together, and in that sense they were cooperating with each other. I think religion was a kind of cement that got people together and going in the right direction. So I think that's right.
I think it doesn't apply to this.
I think it does apply today, but maybe to a lesser extent. I don't know. I think there's both sides of the argument. Some people say no, get rid of religion completely. I wouldn't say that. I think it has some benefits, and others obviously say, well, the only way we can live is by following the commandments, and I believe entirely in my particular holy book. Those are the two extremes.
But of course, suppose for the sake of argument that it were shown that religion was useful for the survival of humanity or life in general. That wouldn't actually of itself, of course, make it right.
No.
It right in the sense of truth.
That's true.
And that's a completely independent question.
Yes.
I'd just like to say, well, of all the things you've said, I mean, for me, the fundamental is the Platonic dilemma, because it is hard to, I think, to get a morality out of pure science. You've got to make some assumptions. You're getting whatever it's the author.
David Hume's
it is hard, but presupposing that God doesn't actually solve it, that's the problem. Because if there is a well, we can go on for a long time, but fundamentally, do I do something because God tells me to do it? If I do something simply because God tells me to do it, then I'm surrendering my own judgment to God's judgment. But then why would the judgment, I've got to make a judgment that what God says is right. Otherwise, how do I follow this God rather than any other possible God?
Can I just pick up on the theme that you're talking about? Because I think it's very interesting. It's one that I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about, that I see very clearly that a lot of the institutions of religious belief, the bringing together of tribes, following a certain sort of set of rules and sort of combating against other tribes that didn't follow those rules, setting up a sort of safe, sort of, you don't kill your neighbour and things like this, protected that group of people so that they could survive and live together and cooperate. And now we are in the 21st century. I can look back and say there's an awful lot of very useful parts of having a supernatural power, sort of saying, do this because then you'll have a place in heaven, even though sort of life was pretty grim. And we should say, I still want all of those sort of trappings of religion. This is why I'm so engaged with Dorset Humanists, because they give me the community that I belong to. We get together and we talk about the moral issues and the issues of the world and how we can make it a better place. I want to sing songs together. I want to sort of be part of that, and I want to feel as if I'm part of a humanity that's sort of making it better for the future. So, I can sort of thank these sort of early religious ideas for sort of cementing a sort of a format for how we can survive into the 21st century. But now that we know that the world isn't flat and that life has evolved over 14 billion years and that there are stars in the sky and the universe goes on, now we know all of that, and we can see that there is no aspect of life today that actually has sort of there has been some supernatural involvement in. I say, let's learn from these trappings of religion and adopt a lot of these. I think maybe we need to get together once a week and talk about things, but we don't need to stop and say, we do this because there's a supernatural force. So, my take.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's almost a question of clarification. That's right, yes. Thank you, Chris, for the presentation. It was just almost a clarification. You said that the morality is formed by collective judgment. And so just to clarify, a society deems what is right and wrong. That is where we find morality.
I think that's one of the influences about how you go about forming your own opinion. Yes. Obviously, you have to take the facts, look at the evidence, etc., etc. But one of the issues is you also take on board what society what the view is of society, and you take that on board as part of your decision-making process.
And so kind of, a hypothetical situation, but a real situation in history and across the world, there may be societies and people forming judgments where actually, from our perspective, right is wrong and wrong is right. So a society where genocide is accepted, or a society where female genital mutilation is accepted. In that case, would you, we talk about right and wrong, most of us in our heads have a very kind of clear absolute idea of right and wrong, but actually the sort of right and wrong that you've been talking about is actually a very subjective or a very relative right and wrong. So there may be a culture and people making informed decisions where those things are actually right. And perhaps, say, 100 years ago, when a lot of people in Europe thought that Jewish people were almost subhuman, if society agreed on that, although I would say it's absolutely wrong, and I'm sure everyone in this room would agree with that, at that time, that was almost a right opinion. By the sort of categories you're using, is that fair?
I think you've got a point. It's a fair point because, for example, 400 years ago, we should have been burning witches.
Yes.
This is another example.
Slavery.
Slavery was a right. And it says in the Bible somewhere that we should burn witches, but we have to take on view. Have to take a view. Each of us have to take a view of whether what is being said in these various holy books or other documents, and indeed what society is saying. We have to take our own view, saying, is that what I want to do or not?
Sorry, just one last thing. So based on your worldview, I guess from my perspective, it's a question I've asked a lot, and it's helpful to get some clarification that actually then the original misconception was really to do with right and wrong, wasn't it? And whether everything was permissible, I suppose. And actually,
that's what Dostoevsky would say.
Yes, it's an interesting.
Without God, is anything permitted?
And really, what you're saying is yes, because if society deemed it to be correct,
No,
and if people make decisions? Is that
well,
right?
yes, I think it's a combination. You ultimately have to make your own decision.
Right, yes.
But nevertheless, you will take on board what the current societal values are. That will be part of your decision-making process. Now, in some cases, it will be a very major part. In other cases, it will be a minor part. But it's up to you to decide.
May I say
Possible.
something? I think we're sort of born into a pre-existing society, aren't we? So we're born into pre-existing ways of thinking about certain things.
And can I say, I think we are gradually, I mean, it makes it sound as if we will suddenly go back to, burning witches or because we will decide. But we are, as we develop, as we evolve, we become more and more humane. So I don't think there's going to be, you can see segments of society where there's horrible things going on, but any decent person condemns that, and we work together as a people to try and right some of the inhumane activities in certain other countries. But it's like with, say, animal welfare. It's interesting. We are at the moment now with animal husbandry, where sometimes some of the slaughter techniques are in my mind, sort of rather inhumane. Now, I think there may be a future where we are much more strict about how we treat livestock and how we deal with those. I don't think they're going to go back ever, because actually, as we evolve, it's slightly self-interest. We have survived this point by looking after our communities and ensuring that our children therefore live in a decent community, and therefore they will survive and they will have children. And so we're all sort of protecting our genetic inheritance effectively. It's a very primitive thing. So we become more humane to protect the world for our future societies.
And if I may say so, that moral progress, which I agree with you, tends to be happening with a few hiccups through history, is independent of whether there's a God or not, because obviously, as you've said, through Christian history and other religions as well, opinions have changed, interpretations of Christianity have changed absolutely, fundamentally, as far as morality is concerned, through history. The same as interpretations without God have changed, and so it is hard. It is hard to, and there isn't any. Well, I haven't found any place that you can look for absolute right or wrong. It's something that we have to make judgments through our humanity and on. But the point is that those judgments, which are hard, are not actually made easier by the supposition that there's a God.
Yeah, can I make a comment there? Because we've got several very useful threads coming through from Miles and this young lady down here. And I think we've been responding to these threads from a very myopic lens of 2,000 years. If you can widen the lens back, widen it back maybe 5,000 to 7,000 years, and look at the totality of groups that existed all over the globe, they were primarily non-believers. Particularly in the Orient, for example, the Confucian persuasion, when it developed, the key factor there was the golden rule, which is universal throughout these developments. Getting back to the young lady there that was speaking about the place that religion has in shaping our culture, our moral culture, I think it's fair to say that religion was a fairly good first draft of what we need to think about in terms of morality and so on and so forth. But combined with the developments of polytheism, in other words, displacing polytheism with monotheism, so as soon as you've got one truth, that means all other truths are excluded. And the problems began from there, I think. But I think it's fair to say the religious meme, it can be neurologically identified. There's a space there for what religion does. And I think you can pick it up on the various scanners now. Corpus St. Paris.
Okay, thanks, John. Any other questions?
There's a lady who-
It's kind of irrelevant, it's moved on a bit, but what I was going to say was that, we're saying that we're getting more and more humane and we keep sort of picking up on slavery, but there's actually more I don't know, I just sort of, I think, yeah, we're trying to be more humane and, yeah, animal rights, or trying to free slavery, but we're not. Like, there isn't as good of a drastic improvement or whatever, you know, and so, yeah, I don't know how it fits with where the conversation's now gone, but just to be like, actually, people still are, to a large extent, condoning slavery.
Yes, there are still some horrors in the world. That doesn't make it right, though, does it?
No,
I mean,
yes, no.
So I think we're all striving in the Western world or certain cultures to eradicate those sorts of inhumane, immoral acts. But yes, there's a lot of work to be done.
And so like, just coming back to the subjectivity, like, if, like, a lot of work done, it sounds very good and moral, but like, if everyone uses morals that they can rationalise within themselves, there's an element of selfishness there. So that it's basically everyone thinks what they're doing is okay and right. Like, what's the actual, how does that fit into society? Because if I think, like, I might think I'm perfectly within my rights to, I don't know, be like where I'm, someone else might have a different opinion, and therefore, like, I think while good and like human good and human wrong are subjective, therefore, like, I think the purpose of religion, sort of, there needs to be a way outside of it that puts things forward, the rules. Like, you have 3 sets of 10 commandments. They can't all fit together, and they can't all, like, so my word's getting wrong. But there's always some conflict there. So then how do you rationalise what is actually good?
Yeah, you've got a good point about the selfishness side of things. But because you are living in society, you live in a family and so on, you have to take on board what they want as well as what you want. And I think it's, in a way, it's good that the atheists and humanists don't have the 10 commandments, because otherwise we would just slavishly perhaps follow them.
I thought we had 30.
Well, they don't. Just, you know, and then probably 1,000. So you know, it's up to us to bear in. Yeah, and I agree with you. It is subjective. It's all subjective. There's nothing. There's no. In that sense, there's no moral authority. It's up to us to decide, based on other factors, you know, family, society, friends, and indeed what it says in holy books as well, and indeed what Richard Dawkins.
How do you use holy books to distinguish your writing when you get holy books?
Sorry?
Like, how could you use holy books to distinguish your writing when you think a holy book or the author of that holy book is false?
Well, I probably wouldn't use the Bible or the Quran, but lots of other people would, and that helps them to form and make their own values.
And besides which, I mean, thou shalt not kill. Absolutely. You know, I don't have a problem with some of the statements about love thy neighbour as thyself. I mean, you know, there are a few of the commandments where I say absolutely, but I don't say that they have come from a higher source. I think they are a decent way for society to live. If an individual says, well, I've decided that it's all right and it's morally correct for me to steal money from my neighbour, that doesn't make it right, does it? It's, you know, you can't be subjective in that way and deciding your own little code of, you know, I'm going to pinch their top.
Yeah, but then it might be like if they had no money themselves in their neighbours and who had won a lot of money in the lottery, and they were starving family, would it be okay? So that morally is right.
They can justify that action. It doesn't make it morally correct, though, does it?
But otherwise, family would die.
There are times when if that person's heard in court, they may get off with a small sentence because of the circumstances. Still means that if they've done an ethically wrong thing, but...
Okay, I'll come back to you in a minute.
Just a bit of conflict in my mind. You spent kind of half of it saying that we should make our own decisions. Our own morality, and then you've got lots and lots of rules for humanism, and that almost felt like having rules now kind of meant humanism is like religion itself.
Yeah,
tongue-in-cheek.
It was a real tongue-in-cheek. You know, Richard Dawkins in his book gave his examples, and I deliberately had a set of other examples. Again, they were largely tongue-in-cheek. They weren't rules. I think they were sort of just saying, well, yeah, if you guys have got your 10 Commandments, we can come up with 10 Commandments. We're a bit better than your 10 Commandments. It was that kind of thing. But I don't think it wasn't. Certainly, humanists and atheists don't look at. I mean, I haven't seen those 10 Commandments before. In fact, I haven't seen any of those 30 before the last few days. So we don't sort of study these things.
No, they're Richard Dawkins' view as to how he lives his life. Really, it's not.
Yeah, exactly. He's not saying you should all live like this. And there is definitely a time to choose as well. Yeah, it's cool.
Sorry, really small, like, sorry, so much, like, you say sort of like, just kind of curiosity, like, when you sort of meet up, what kind of songs do you sing?
We don't. Dorset Humanists have never sung in their lives. However, there is a group called the Sunday Assembly, which is, although it's known as the Atheist Church, and they deliberately do that, and they will have a group play. But Dorset Humanists don't do that.
BHA's got a choir.
Yeah, BHA's got a choir.
The Metropolitan Organisation.
I just wondered, because I know there's a lot of stuff about it. I mean, there is a sense of community that comes with what you see when people do great concerts or like shows or CC acts and stuff. But I don't know, it was sort of just what kind of stuff.
Yeah, we don't do it yet.
Sorry, the person with purple hat on the front row, is it Lynn? And it was a discussion about how evolutionary theory and Darwinism fits into this, and how really if that's a fundamental way that we understand how we came to be, then our morality does spring out of that. Would you say that's part of the case?
Yes, I think.
And so my question, I suppose, then, is if our morality springs from Darwinism, and you were saying about how we want to further our genes and bear children and make sure that our line continues, and I'm not sure that the kind of morality that you've described springs from Darwinism. It's just a thought that actually inherently there's something selfish about Darwinism, that I would prefer my children to survive than someone else's. Is that correct?
I think that's a bit of a...
Is that a jump?
I think it is, frankly. I don't think that Darwinism is that way. For example, I mean, I think that the issue about living in groups is for mutual cooperation. So that actually helps the group survive rather than perhaps the individual.
But wouldn't helping the groups... I can understand that having a functional community and a loving community would be a good thing, but isn't that for the benefit of me, ultimately? I'm saying if animals live in community, it benefits them.
It is, but it's also this thing about sort of our children, our grandchildren. And I don't use the word selfish ever. I think it's self-interest, which is a slightly different concept. If I help my neighbour, then I'm help when they're in trouble. I'm sort of helping towards the ethos that we live in a society where we help our neighbour. So actually, my children living 200 miles away, their neighbours might help them, when they get into difficulty. It's that, I'm not as precise as that, but it's encouraging a society where we're all protecting the future for ourselves and for our children.
There's an interesting thing called the Machiavellian hypothesis in evolutionary psychology, which talks about how the fact that you can cheat, but that you would end up being ostracized by the group, and being ostracized by the group is actually something that really threatens your individual existence much more than anything else. So actually being part of the group is, in a sense, a self-interest thing.
Now, I'm no expert at all in this, but I'm just thinking it through, and it seems that if it is fundamentally self-interested, or I won't use the word selfish, but if it's fundamentally self-interested, then doesn't that mean that if our morality springs from self-interest, then sometimes we can make morally good decisions because they favour us over others? So, for example, if you're going for a job interview, you might spruce up your CV and be dishonest because you may get the job and someone else doesn't. Now, I'd say that seems immoral, but if morality springs from self-interest and Darwinism, surely that's morally right. Perhaps not. I don't know. Maybe I'm jumping too far, but it seems logical to me.
I was going to say, I'm an atheist, but I show compassion and kindness and empathy to the people that I come into contact with, And the reason is for that is not because I'm answering to the judgment of a God, it's because I'm reacting to the either judgment or the interest, the judgment of the person. Like, say for example, there was an example about stealing. The person who's being stolen from, if they feel outraged or upset by that, then the person will be answering to them. Like, not God. It's not for God to decide whether he thought that was a sin or not, but rather the person who was stolen from, their outrage is a reference to where the judgment on whether that was good or not comes from. It's like relative to the person who's been wronged. Like, I believe we answer to, well, it's like not a belief, it's like if I analyse why it is that I'm being nice to people and not going around stealing, it's because I'm answering to those people whose possession it is.
Yeah, and you don't have to try hard at it by the sounds of it. It's effortless. Yeah.
Traditionally, in Christianity, people were told to love their neighbour because that way they'd get to heaven, otherwise they'd go to hell. Which obviously isn't a very moral view, because that is self-interest, isn't it? The only way to get to heaven is by doing good. Whereas if you don't suppose a heaven and a hell and someone up there, then you're doing good because you think it's the right thing to do.
Like, just Alan, you said sort of say like test everything and sort of like question things. Like, have you like analysed into Christianity or religion before forming on like another right? Or is there always like atheism is like an opinion of not living in things like no, like you sort of like from either knowledge is found or things. So a lot of Christians the same way sort of come to Christianity by analysing.
Well, me personally, I was brought up in St. Peter's School in Bournemouth, which was the only Catholic school, public Catholic school. It so happens that my parents are agnostic or atheist. But then I spent about 5 years, personally, I went studying philosophy it turned out to be a Hindu cult in London. So, everyone's different.
And also I think, obviously Buddhism doesn't have a strong...
But I mean, one of the best books I've probably ever read was Meaning Smart. He had a book in the 1970s, a dialogue between, I think it was 6 or 10 religions. That was fascinating. It's fascinating.
So that's what we share with Christians, with Miles.
Okay, we've got one more with Nick, then one question.
Yeah.
So, did you want to say? Don't worry.
Yeah, no, I'd like to say something. Well, I'd like it because I have a bit of
a penultimate question, and then you can have a final question.
Oh, okay.
We've got another penultimate question. Okay, right. Let's wrap it up there, I think. Hopefully,
we've got some pieces at the back, so if you'd like to stay around, thank you all for coming. First of all, thank you to our speakers very much.